Good morning, Leesburg Grace. Today, I am trying out a brand new skill. I got a lapel mic, and I'm doing my best to up my audio game. So, how am I doing? Good morning, Leesburg Grace. Grateful to spend Sunday morning with you. I know we're not here. Hello, Leesburg Grace. Great to spend Sunday morning with you. It would be so much better if we were in the same place. But here at the same time, we are worshiping our God who has not changed, and we are pursuing our mission, which has not changed. Every believer becoming full in Christ, united in love, and strong in service. And yes, we are meeting in a different spot today. I'm greeting you from the church lobby because I have learned a new skill, how to speak with a lapel mic. So that's kind of cool. I thought I would up my game with the mic because we probably will have at least 2 more services online before we get to gather back together in a large gathering. We want to keep you up to date on that, what's happening. We will not be meeting here on Mother's Day. The following Sunday, we're exploring the idea of an outdoor service. And so please stay tuned. It may not be till the end of May where we're all back together in a room. And we understand that things change fast these days, and some people won't feel comfortable gathering back together. We totally understand that. We respect that. We will continue to pray that someday in the near future, God will bring us back together and have us bonded in a more strong, intentional way because of what he's brought us through. What you can expect from today, we are going to check in with a few people from our church, have a few songs, and then we're going to introduce you to the sermon, Bent Inward, part 3 of 11:13.
Hi, church. We're the Sharps, and we're just wanting to say hi to everyone. We haven't seen you in a while. Thomas says hi. What's something that you've learned since quarantine?
I've just learned the importance of staying in touch with people and just knowing how important it is to have other people in your life pouring into you. So even if it's over Zoom or just talking to people on the phone, it's important just to stay in touch and be with people.
And part of my job has been calling churches and just checking in with them, and I've been really enjoying hearing all of the positive stories from various churches across the country about how they've been positively impacting their communities and their church families.
Hi guys, we miss you a lot. We miss being at church. We've been doing pretty good though. Noah's still being able to work full time at Wildman. I have had lots of time off from Richards, where I work, just because we're closed for a little while, because it's given me a lot of time to do stuff around the house. Our bunny is living his best life and has no idea what's going on. So we're doing good though. We miss everybody.
This is the part that I really want recorded. I've been envisioning a doxology sung by a group of people on Zoom. And so what I'd really like to do is have everyone unmuted right now. And if Cassie, could you get us started on Praise God, give him all blessings. We're gonna blow this thing up. It's gonna be horrible, but it's gonna be lovely.
Praise
God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
How about if somebody just directs and we do it?
Oh, no, that was so good.
Oh, it wasn't.
guys.
It'll sound better on Sunday. I'll do something with the audio file. I don't know.
On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblems of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. To the old rugged cross I will ever be true. Its shame and reproach gladly bear. Then he'll call me someday to my home far away, where his glory forever I'll stay. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown him with many crowns, the Lamb sky can fully bear that sight, but downward bend on burning eye at mysteries so bright. Crown him the Lord of life, who triumphs o'er the grave, who rose victorious to the strife for those he came to save. His glories now we sing, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives at death made high. Crown him the Lord of heaven, one with the Father known, one with the Spirit through him given, from yonder glorious throne. To thee be endless praise, for thou for us hast died. Be thou, O Lord, through endless days adored and magnified.
Good morning, kids. We're going to talk about the life of David. And one of the big ideas in David's life is that David trusted God. And you can too. David was anointed king. But when he was younger, he was anointed king. He wasn't anointed king and then became king right away. He fought Goliath. He ended up living at the palace with Saul and became friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. Saul didn't like David because everybody liked David better than Saul. And so Saul started thinking about maybe killing David, and Jonathan heard about it. So Jonathan was a true friend to David, and he warned him and saved David. But David had to leave and run away. He had to hide in caves, he ran away from Saul, and he still trusted God through all of it. He knew that God had a plan and that God could be trusted with his life and with his future, and he knew he'd be king. And one day, he saw Saul out trying to find him, and so David and his people who were hiding with him went and hid in a cave. Well, Saul went into that cave, and David had a chance to come up behind him and kill him. But David trusted God, that God's timing was better, and that he should obey God and do what was right. So he snuck up behind Saul, and he cut off some of his robe so he could show Saul that he had the chance to kill him, but he didn't. And so when Saul went out, David came out and he said, "Hey, look, I cut off some of your robe, but I didn't kill you, even though I could have. I know that you are the king and God made you king, and I need to do what's right." So David continued to do what was right, and he continued to trust God. And eventually, David did become king. And because he trusted God, the timing was better. And you can trust God too, even with the timing. Even with being stuck in your house or whatever it is that sometimes frustrates you, we can trust God because God takes care of us. He's taken care of your parents. He's taken care of your grandparents. He took care of David, and he can take care of you too. You can trust God.
Good morning, everybody. We have an oldie but a goodie today, and I think it's one that we could all use as a good reminder. We're going to sing Jesus Loves Me. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. And it's true, he does love us.
Two years ago, I started going to the Pastors Theologian Conference. I want to say that again. I just want that to sink in. It's hosted by the Center for Pastor Theologians. This is like a highbrow group. This is an officious group. And they gather people from all across the country for 2 days in Oak Park, Chicago, one of the wealthier suburbs of Chicago. It meets in a big, beautiful old church building with stained glass. When you go in for the main sessions, you're handed a hymn book with a liturgy. It is very, very official. I went 2 years ago because the theme struck me as something interesting: the art and science of spiritual formation. And I really liked the idea of viewing myself as a pastor theologian. Just sounds good, doesn't it? Pastor theologian. I found out very quickly, as soon as I walked into the building, that maybe I wasn't actually a pastor theologian, because pretty much everybody else in the room, and it was filled with men and women, they had blazers and beards. And the women didn't have the beards, but the men all had beards. They all had blazers, and they looked the part of a hipster Christian. The second year I went, I made sure to wear my pink or my salmon pants pretty much every day because I wanted to try to fit in a little bit. When I was at the Pastors Theologian Conference, there was a guy named Jammin who got to speak. That's really his name. His name is Jammin, and he did one of the breakout sessions. And I remember sitting there in his breakout session, watching him with his perfect beard, groomed hair, talking about wisdom and spiritual formation. And about every 3 lines, he paused and did one of these looks with his face off to the sky, and he smiled. The guy was so proud of what he was writing that I was having a really hard time appreciating anything that he wrote. In my head, I was actually slamming jamming. That's what I called it. I was slamming jamming because I was like, this guy is so full of himself. And I saw it, and I kind of wanted to wring his neck. I kind of wanted to knock him off his platform. And then I was going to happily overtake the stage for them and share with all of the other pastor theologians what they should know. And I realized in that moment that I was a proud, arrogant, envious jerk. I don't always like these moments that God brings into my life where he reveals something bent inward in my heart. But when I was busy slamming, jamming, and making comparisons between myself and every other pastor theologian in the room, I thought, there is much spiritual formation that needs to be done. The Apostle Paul actually looked at the Corinthian church and probably looked at his own bent heart on a regular basis and said, there is still work to be done. There is a lack of love in the church. The church does not lack for gifted people, for smart people, for folks who are willing to give time and money and service and skills and music and children's work and all that kind of stuff. The church doesn't lack for skilled or intelligent people. What it lacks often is love. So we are in this sermon series called Loved 13, Showing Care in the Age of Social Distancing. It's the Apostle Paul helping the church in Corinth become more like Jesus. What they're missing is love. This church was riddled with problems. We've seen in previous weeks that there were factions and rivalries in this church. We have seen that there were some loose sexual ethics and they were bragging about it. There was idolatry. There were people flaunting their liberties. It is lawful for me, and not really being sensitive to people with a different or weaker conscience. There were lots of problems with their corporate worship. There's bragging about gifts. There's disorderly services going on. And so he takes a special amount of time in chapters 12 through 14 to discuss the spiritual gifts. He articulates them. He doesn't really define them. But then he breaks in chapter 13 and he says to the church, I want to make sure you know this. Love must be at the heart of all of the gifts, tongues, knowledge, faith, prophecy, mysteries, etc. Because it's love that's the mortar between the bricks of the Christian building. So we've looked at all this in the past few weeks, and we said the Apostle Paul wants to build up the church. His goal is to build up the body of Christ so that they become like Christ, holy and blameless. And if that's going to be true for them in Corinth, if it's going to be true for us in the age of social distancing, we have to be a people that loves. So the Apostle Paul told us what love looks like last week, and he got us started. I read this whole passage. And when I read this passage, I said there are, some people say 14 attributes. I'm going to say 16 attributes, and half of them are positive. Love is patient and kind, rejoices with the truth, it believes all things. And then half of them are negative. It gives us a contrast picture of love. Love is not, and then a list of 7 attributes. Or love does not, and a list of attributes. So we're going to look at more detail at these ones that are the contrast. Because this list of pink letters, these negatives, all reflect really, really poorly on what's going on in Corinth. They show that the Corinthian people are missing the mark for love. So last week, love is patient and kind. And we looked at that. That's something that's part of God's character. Now this week, we're going to look at what's opposite of God and what's going on in Corinth. It's this. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. We're going to look at these in closer detail here. So this is the contrast picture. We'll finish it out next week. This is kind of how we view ourselves in light of others. And next week we're going to look at how we treat other people in sort of a contentious, striving, quarreling sort of way. So this week really reflects on what's going on inside of me as I view others. Next week it's like, how do I go after others? And these are all the negative qualifications. So let's take a closer look at love does not envy. It would be worth noting what this word envy means. The actual word that we translate is the word zealous. And it's an interesting word because it can have a positive side to it or it could have a negative side. So when we talk about jealousy in the positive sense, that's the idea of protecting or appreciating what matters to you, protecting or appreciating what belongs to you. A mom is jealous for time with her children. A husband should be jealous for time with his wife. A boss might be jealous for the kind of work that his employees do for him. And we get to see in the Old Testament that God was jealous for his people, Israel. In fact, I would make the argument that God is jealous for his world. That is why Jesus died for it. He's jealous for everyone watching this right now. He wants a relationship with you. The Apostle Paul uses this word zealous in a positive way in 1 Corinthians twice. And it brackets what we're talking about right now in chapter 13. He has told the people in Corinth that they should earnestly desire the greater gifts. It is okay to see other gifted people. There are people in our church, like when I watch Rick play the piano, I'm like, man, I wish I could play the piano like he does. When I watch Art serve, I wish I had the servant's heart that Art has. When I see Micah playing the guitar and singing, I was like, I wish I had his voice. When I watch some of the people in the nursery take care of kids and just make them laugh and just have the patience to just sit there and cuddle with them, I wish I had the patience with kids that some other people have. This is earnestly desiring. These people model something that's really good, and you wish you could copy that. So earnestly desiring the greater gifts is not a bad thing. It's acknowledging that other people have spiritual gifts or skills or personality traits that make them effective at what they do. And the Apostle Paul says, earnestly desire those gifts. So that's jealousy. Jealousy in and of itself, not a bad thing. Envy, on the other hand, is a bad thing. Envy is looking at what other people have and resenting the fact that they have it, or even trying to destroy that thing so that other person can't enjoy it, or worse yet, destroy that person. Envy resents and destroys. So the Apostle Paul in other places writes, take off the old person, the way you used to be when you were bent or inward. Take off envy, he says. Envy is a form of idolatry. Well, that's strange. Where does he get that idea? He gets that, I think, from the 10 Commandments. Commandment number 10 was, you should not covet your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's stuff. And the idea there is that you don't want your neighbor to have it. You would rather no one has it than your neighbor have it, or your neighbor get hurt and then you can take ownership of it. You think that thing is so good that you wish ill on someone else. You have made that thing a god. And that thing could be a lot of things. We'll get to that in a moment, but take off envy. One of the things that's interesting in Paul's writing too is that this idea of envy is often paired with the idea of strife. This idea that I'm willing to fight you for it. Okay. Something funny happened when they first put the stay-at-home order into effect. I had a panic moment. And I thought, I got to go to the grocery store and I need to get some food for my house. So I went to the Dollar General, which I almost never go to the Dollar General, and I spent $100 just on food. And it was all like prepackaged meat. And I thought, my family cannot live on prepackaged meat alone. So then on the way home, this was the night that they announced the stay-at-home order in Indiana, I stopped at Martin's. And I was grateful to see that the parking lot was not cram-packed filled with hoarding people like I was about to. And I went into the produce section and I go, oh, there are vegetables. Except when I got to the broccoli, as soon as I arrived at the broccoli, another guy arrived at the broccoli. And he looked down at the crowns and I looked down at the crowns and he looked at me and I looked at him. And I said to Broccoli Man, I'll fight you for them. And then I smiled. He backed away. I got my broccoli. No, we just sort of laughed about it. But that's what envy does. It will turn broccoli into a brawl. When you see something someone else has, you are willing to fight them for it. This is the negative sense. One guy who's done some work thinking through these virtues in the Christian life, Peter Kreeft, he says, envy, though not the greatest sin, is the only one that gives the sinner no pleasure at all. Not even fake or temporary satisfaction. Envy removes joy because envy is the opposite of gratitude, and gratitude is the seedbed of joy. He continues thinking through this idea of envy. He says, envy is often the path that leads from pride, the greatest sin, to hatred, the lowest state of sin. And so these sins are connected, this idea of envy and pride and rudeness that we're going to see in 1 Corinthians 13. But right now we're focusing in on the envy side of things. Maybe it flows from pride because you think you deserve it. You don't think the other person should have it. There's this concept that the pride or envy was considered one of the 7 deadly sins. There was this concept in Jesus' world and Paul's world too, where you would practice something called the evil eye. And this was a symbol for envy. The evil eye was when you would see someone that had status that you wanted, or a family dynamic that you wanted, or goods that you wanted, and you would look at them with this kind of weird gaze, thinking that with your squinty evil eye, you could wish ill on them, and then you might get that good thing for yourself. That is what the evil eye was, and it often stood for envy. I think even later it was Shakespeare who was credited for calling envy the green-eyed monster. Envy was this green-eyed monster where you want more for you. And I just want to say, if we're going to put this into a memorable idea, green is not a good shade for us. I'm not talking St. Patrick's Day, pinch me. I'm saying green as living life through the lens of envy is not a good shade for us. We can see this idea of green played out in the scriptures. There was gangrene in Corinth. This idea that envy corrupts the people. There were factions. Well, I'm with Apollos. I'm with Paul. I'm with the more popular group. They're seeking status, honor, popularity, influence. They were bragging about their gifts. I have the gift of prophecy. I have the gift of healing. This is gangrene in Corinth, but this dates all the way back to the first family that ever lived. You remember Cain and Abel? Cain murdered Abel because he was envious of the way that God received Abel's offering, but did not receive Cain's offering. And then you see envy play out in all these messed up family dynamics in the book of Genesis. Jacob and Esau, there's this envy for their father's blessing. Rachel envies Leah because she's fertile and Rachel is not. Joseph's brothers envy him because he has this coat of many colors, probably would have looked great at the Pastors Theologians Conference, and he had his father's favor. Envy was an issue all the way back from the first family, and you read about it through Genesis. Green is not a good shade for us, and envy is still an issue today. In his work through the corporate disciplines, John Lillis wrote, "No attempt was made in any of these examples to positively emulate the individual that was being envied. Rather, in each case, there was an attempt to destroy what was envied." So Cain murders Abel. He doesn't say, "Abel, I see you're doing a great job with sacrifice. Teach me how to do it." He's saying, if I can't have it, you shouldn't have it. And that's what envy does. There are two parts to it. There is resentment for the person who has it, and then there is a lack of gratitude for what you have. There's gangrene today too. Green is not a good shade for us. You might be envious of someone else's financial situation. You found out, now of course this couldn't happen today because we haven't quite opened up yet. You found out though that someone had this beautiful vacation planned for South Carolina. They were going to Myrtle Beach. They were going to spend a whole week there. They were going to fly. And you think, man, maybe you wouldn't want to go to Myrtle Beach. But the fact that they had the financial freedom to fly there and take their whole family, and you think, man, that would be great. I wish I could do that. Think of the family situation someone has. You see this couple and they just have such a delightful marriage. When they walk, they hold hands. When they talk, they make eye contact. They giggle at each other's jokes. They still seem like they're dating. And you think, I wish I had. Now, husband, you may not want that wife. Wife, you may not want that husband. What you're envious of is the harmony that they have. Because inside you're like, I have worked and worked and worked on my marriage. I've read books. I've gone to seminars. We've done counseling. And we still don't get along. And there's envy there. Or it could be a Leah Rachel kind of situation where you see people who have all of these kids and they neglect them, and it infuriates you because you have cried out to God time and time again, give us a child, and he hasn't given that to you yet. And envy comes in those situations. You know, we just had a couple from our church move down to Indy, Jacob and Hannah. They're in their early 20s. They're young. They're married. They're starting a new path right now. New apartment, new set of friends, new job, new schooling situation. You may not envy any of the details, But the fact that they're young in their 20s and they're adventurous, we could envy that life stage thinking, man, I'm in my mid 40s right now and I missed my opportunity to try some of those things. You're in your early 60s and you just don't have the energy that the young people have and you envy that. Think about influence. When we first started doing online church, one of my buddies who's a pastor and he's a pastor out in Pennsylvania. He said, hey, will you watch my sermon? He said this to me and like 10 other guys. Will you watch my sermon and give me some positive feedback? Because I'm afraid to see what I look like behind the lens. And so we watched. But the first thing I noticed when I went to his YouTube page was that he had lots of views, like way more than I did. He was well over 100, 150 or something like that. And I had like 38. I'm like, why does he get to have 38? Why do I only have 38 views when he has got like 150 views? I mean, I got clever things to say. I got these fancy lights up here. I'm working hard at this. See, the issue here is this gangrene, and greed doesn't look good on any of us. It's not a good shade for any of us. Often it's fueled by pride. It's fueled by a high sense of our own worth, of our own abilities. The Apostle Paul says in the next section, love does not boast. It is not arrogant. You could plug in the word proud there. Love is not proud. Now, what's specific about these words, and the first one you really don't see anywhere else in Scripture, and the second word Paul uses often when he writes to the Corinthians, you'll see this here, is that it speaks of speech. High speech about ourselves. So the translation is, love is not puffed up. It's like breathing into a balloon or a bag. It's these big words about us that give us a big head. It doesn't always impress people, but it makes us feel like we're having an impression. So these people were puffed up because of the alliances that they had. They were puffed up because they could make plans and then they could execute those plans. They were puffed up because they were getting away with sexual impurity and no one was stopping them. They felt pretty impressed by themselves about that, and they were puffed up by their knowledge. The Apostle Paul says here that love builds up, knowledge puffs up. So he is taking issue with the people in Corinth here. He's saying, do not be so full of yourselves that you're blind to the needs and the gifts and the abilities and the strengths of other people. They're puffed up in Corinth. In fact, if you listened to these people, here's what it sounds like. It's just this like empty, ongoing gas leak. Gas is not a nice sound from us. I'm not talking about gas like we'll talk about that in a minute. But gas, I'm talking about like a gas leak because you're about to start up your stove. Gas is not a nice sound from us. When we talk, it's just us full of hot air. We're windbags. That's what the Apostle Paul is saying. Don't be a windbag so full of yourself that no one wants to hear what you have to say. This has been an issue throughout human history, by the way. Gas leaks were nothing new in Corinth. If you go back to the Tower of Babel, the people said, we could build a temple, a ladder, a building up to God. That was a gas leak. King Hezekiah, he had pride enough in the fact that God spared him that he brought in the Babylonians and said, look at all of this gold. And that started to wreck his life. The king of Babylon, the king of Tyre, both of them had a really high view of themselves, and they said things like, I am like God. King Nebuchadnezzar felt the same way. He built this big statue of himself. He wanted people to worship him. He spoke highly of himself, and God then lowered him to the ground and made him like an animal for a year. Read that story this week in Daniel 4. God has a way of raising up the humble and lowering the proud. And just so we don't think this is an issue only in the Hebrew scriptures way, way, way back in the past. Jesus' closest disciple, Peter, after his prized moment of proclaiming, "You are the Christ," then within minutes says to Jesus, "I don't like your plan to go and suffer and die for the sins of the world. I don't think you should do that." What a proud statement. And Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Even Peter was puffed up. It's a gas leak that we see in the biblical past. There are still gas leaks today. It comes out in our expressions of pride. And C.S. Lewis wrote about this. Pride was his least favorite sin. He called it the greatest of sins. He called it the anti-God state of mind. Pride is in competition with everyone else's pride, C.S. Lewis says. It is essentially competitive. It is because I wanted to be the big noise at the party, the gas leak at the party, that I am annoyed that someone else is being the big noise. Pride is essentially competitive. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man, Lewis writes. And so we speak big, windy words of ourselves so that we can appear bigger than we actually are. Here are some examples of gas leaks today. In Corinth, they were dropping names. Perhaps it's name dropping. Now, I will eventually say something nice about Jammin. God is doing a work in me of spiritual formation to make me more like Jesus. But I was required to read a chapter. His paper was in a chapter in a book I had to read this week. And when I opened it up, he said, "Well, the last time I talked with Dallas Willard, he said to me, blah, 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 blah." It didn't matter. I was lost. He had name-dropped Dallas Willard. Now, for those of you who are like, who's Dallas Willard and why does it matter? Dallas Willard, in the Christian writing industry, in the spiritual formation world, is like Elvis because he's dead and he produced some incredible works. Dallas Willard is like the Beatles because he's gone, but everything he said was like a gold hit record. And Jammin just wrote, Dallas Willard. Name dropping. You've heard people name drop. And it might not be the name of a person. They might name drop, "Oh, when I took my trip to the Andes Mountains and got to the top of the highest peak." Or they might name drop a different sort of thing. "Oh, when I went to this fancy restaurant and I didn't even blush at the bill that was so high when I spent $100 on my steak." There's a lot of name dropping that's a gas leak today. It could be one-upping. Someone's in the middle of telling a story and you have checked out because you know you're just waiting for your opportunity to tell the next story that's bigger and it's better and it's more funny, and people are going to say, "Wow, I like what she has to say." It could be freedom of flaunting. This is a gas leak today, where you might post online, "I went into the grocery store and I didn't wear a mask because I'm not afraid of anything. I can't believe all these people are scared." Well, not only is that flaunting of freedom, that actually overlooks why some people are wearing masks. They are wearing masks because they are trying to protect the people around them in case they happen to be carriers. But we can flaunt our freedoms, and it's a form of a gas leak. See, gas is not a nice sound from us. The humble brag, "Oh, how was your week? Oh, I don't know, I just kind of, no big deal, but I mowed the lawn of like 5 widows this week, so I guess I was a little bit busy." Humble bragging. And of course, self-promotion. So subscribe and like to this sermon, and make sure you share it with all of your extended family. There's one other thing that the Apostle Paul wants to take issue with here in Corinth, and it's love is not rude. And this word could be translated a handful of ways. In fact, if you just look at this word in a variety of translations, you have rude, you have love dishonoring others, you have love as something that behaves unseemly, acts unbecomingly, or forces itself on others. The challenge with translating words like this is, here is a word that only shows up in the New Testament twice. Both times it's in this letter to the Corinthians. And the first time it's talking about how we are dealing with our virgin daughters. So this actually can cover, though, a lot of what's going on in Corinth. There was a variety of rudeness, of unbecoming behavior in Corinth. There's public sexual discourse where they're not filtering it at all, and they think it's actually kind of humorous. There's excessive lawsuits, and they seem to be pretty happy with how they're using courts to solve their differences. There's crossing relational boundaries. This is the one verse where this word shows up in Corinth. There's distractions in prayer. And this is in chapter 11 where it's talking about how people wear head coverings and how some wear head coverings and some don't, and that's creating a distraction. And it's kind of rude to be a distraction in prayer. It's not suggesting this is how we need to practice this today, but back then it was a distraction, and that could be rude. Here's another issue in chapter 11, bad table manners. When they came together for communion, they would have a meal as part of it, and some of them were just like stuffing their faces or drinking too much of the communion wine. That was bad table manners, and that was rude. And then, of course, we have chapter 14, where people are using the opportunity in a worship service to give their word of prophecy or to speak tongues so other people could hear it, and that was disorderliness in worship. And that was them being rude. And so this idea shows up a lot in Corinth, and this is why Paul is telling them, don't be rude. In fact, it's a form of being gross. You're not attentive to other people's needs. You're not being sensitive to the context where you are. Being gross is unbecoming of us. I think that's what the Apostle Paul is saying. You can be gross in how you stuff your face when other people are only getting a very little bit to eat. You can be gross in how you talk constantly and other people are quietly processing and you don't try to draw them out. You can be gross in the way that you carry yourself, the kind of humor that you use. In fact, if we want examples of gross habits, we could talk about how God had a system in the Old Testament where he asked people not to poop in public. This was pretty good basic hygiene. Don't poop in public. Deuteronomy 23:12 through 14. Another time this word, and this word rudeness, when it was translated into the Greek, the Old Testament translated into the Greek, it shows up 30 times. Most of them are right here in Leviticus 18 and 20. And the idea here was don't be publicly naked. Keep your clothes on. In front of your family, out in public, keep your clothes on. So actually, if you just practice keeping your clothes on, you probably would never poop in public, and then the problem is solved. So gross habits in ancient Israel were an issue. And there are plenty of gross habits today. One example would be crude humor. Like, I'm really fighting the urge to do more poop jokes right now, but I will move on. Those could be sexual jokes. I move on. Public nudity. That would be inappropriate. Some of the things that people wear when they go to a public beach or go to this, when they go to a pool, a public pool, can feel gross. Like certain bathing suits, guys, Speedos, no. Sexism is gross. Reducing people to sex or gender, something like that, and then using that against them to objectify them, that's gross. Hoarding and line jumping, that's gross. Pay attention to other people who are in the store with you. Nose picking, that can be gross. Farting in church, that can be gross. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't have fun sometimes as Christians. Because I think sometimes it can be gross how serious we are as Christians. In fact, what Os Guinness says in his book Fool's Talk is that faith is never flippant and rarely frivolous, and it is foolish to laugh all the time, as it is foolish to be serious all the time. But the truth still stands. The dynamics of the cross of Jesus are closer to comedy than tragedy. Being gross is unbecoming of us, and one of the ways that we can be gross in the time of social distancing is that we only ever talk about pandemic. We need to do things that make us laugh and smile sometimes. We need to do things that ease the burden of the idea of our mortality. We need to do things that bring a smile to other people's faces. So being gross is unbecoming of us, and there are a variety of forms of being gross. But the Apostle Paul isn't suggesting that Christians are not allowed to have fun. We're just not called to be flippant. We put all this together. The Apostle Paul is telling his audience in Corinth that it is not a good shade to be green. Don't envy. That gas is not a nice sound, so don't excessively talk about yourself in glowing terms. And being gross is unbecoming of us. So try not to be rude in a variety of different ways. If you put all this together, he's actually saying our ethic should be less looking at ourselves and more aware of the needs of others. Love looks out to build others up. The common thread in all of these words is actually summarized in the next part of 1 Corinthians 13. I don't have the phrase up here on the screen, but what the Apostle Paul says, love does not look out to its own interests. Love does not look to its own interests. That actually summarizes not being green, not being gassy, not being gross, because you're looking to the interests of others. Jesus actually made that his lifestyle. Philippians chapter 2, it says that Jesus did not view his equality with God something that he should cling to, grasp a hold of, but he emptied himself, took on the form of a servant. He died for us on the cross. He was looking to the needs of others. And the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 2, you should have this mind of Christ. The mind of Christ looks out to build others up. So just a couple closing thoughts. We need to look out, like as in beware. We need to look out and beware the inward bent. And so we look out. There is a phrase for this. It's a Latin phrase. It is incurvatus in se, the inward bent. And Luther wrote about this, I think, very artfully. Our nature, by the corruption of the first sin, being so deeply curved in on itself that it only bends the best gifts of God towards itself and enjoys them. But it also fails to realize that it is so wickedly curved and viciously seeks all things, even God, for its own sake. There is something in us that is bent inward, that we have to continue to bring back to God and say, heal this in me. So we need to beware the inward bent. And one of the really simple prayers that we can pray that just acknowledges this is what's known as the Jesus prayer. I encourage you to pray it at least once a day. It's pausing. It's saying, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. And perhaps you don't like to make that last part of the claim that you're a sinner, but you are a sinner and I am the sinner. There is something that bends inward and focuses me on me. And so we need the Lord's mercy. Beware the inward bent. And the way that it expresses itself often is the ingratitude for my stuff. I don't like the way my house looks right now. You're stuck inside a lot, so you want to remodel every single room. I don't like the way it is. You need new furniture because you're tired of that old furniture. You don't like Netflix anymore. You've scrolled through it a billion times. You're like, we need to get Disney Plus. You're ungrateful for your stuff. That might be a sign that you're bent inward. And you're resentful toward your neighbor. If you are looking at other people and not grateful for what they have, but envious of what they have, that is a sign that you have an inward bent. So we have to look out. Love looks out to build others up. And so we have to look out for our inward bent. Love looks out to build others up, which means we have to look outward. We have to appreciate others. So here, confession time. Jammin', if you are watching this, and I am sure you are not one of the 38 people today. But everybody else, like and subscribe and share it with a friend. Jammin', I read your chapter this week, and I had already heard your speech and rolled my eyes at it because I thought I was the smartest one in the room, and I confess and repent of that. It was a great chapter. It was thoughtful. It was well written. It was God honoring. And I apologize that I had such a negative view of it because I was envious. See, that's something God did in my heart this week. Is that God took something in me that was so inwardly bent and said, why can't you appreciate someone else who writes well and is building up the church? This could be true as you watch another mom who does a great job cooking for her kids. A wholesome diet and a variety of foods, always delicious in smell and taste. And when you see what she posts online, you fail to appreciate her because you're making a comparison against her. And maybe this week, next time you see her food online or her crafts online, you just appreciate her for what she's able to do. We need to appreciate other people. Or you see someone else who has a real confidence in their life. They're not scared to interact with strangers. They're not scared to try new things. And often in the past, when you've seen their courage and their bravery, you just kind of shake your head and be like, well, I could never be like them. I can't believe they're like that. And you start to make excuses for them. Maybe it's appreciating that person's bravery and courage and confidence. When we look outward, we appreciate others. When you love people, you appreciate them. And you can even tell them that. And then, of course, that second part is attending to their needs. This week there were a bunch of ladies from our church who went around and gave out care baskets for folks in our church. I got to hear a few stories about it, and the fact that these women would drive across town after going to a store and picking up things and assembling a gift bag and just dropping it off to say, we haven't forgotten you, we love you, we care about you. That is looking outward. It's those kind of acts that make the love of Jesus so appealing and so palatable. And so when I hear stories like that, I am grateful because it's a picture of love looking out to build others up. Let's not be green this week. Let's not be gassy this week. Let's not be gross this week. Let's actually look out, recognizing there's an inward bent, and look outward. There are people to appreciate, and there are needs that we can meet. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I'm grateful for an opportunity to be part of a church family that cares for one another. I'm grateful, God, for the way that we encourage each other, reach out to each other, provide for and bless each other. It is hard not to be together in this age of social distancing, not to spend quality time. But this is a chance for us to reflect on the kind of people we are becoming. A chance to look closely at our own hearts and pay attention to perhaps that inward bent. Areas where we envy, areas where we boast, areas where we might be gross and rude. God, as you expose those things in us through your Spirit, help us not hang our head in shame, because that's part of the work of becoming more like Jesus, is recognizing what's not quite finished yet and asking for you to make that part of us new. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.